Hello everyone, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today we are going to be talking about something that is very exciting to me, something that I've been looking forward to for many years, and that thing is Bridgerton Season 4. This is going to be my review of Bridgerton Season 4 Volume 1, and I'm gonna be honest, it's probably gonna be a long one, guys, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I feel like it's hard to review a season of Bridgerton without it being a long video because of the many storylines that are going on. But this video is also probably going to be long because I'm just going to go ahead and let you guys know I have an extremely strong bias when it comes to Benedict Bridgerton and Sophie. I don't know if you can tell by the multiple copies of An Offer from a Gentleman behind me. And if the multiple copies behind me aren't enough to clue you in, this is my first copy of An Offer from a Gentleman. These are my annotations in the book. It's very serious to me. So I've been waiting for season 4, or at least I've been waiting for Benedict's season, for what feels like forever. I love Benedict, but I really love Sophie. So I'm sorry, I was born to yap. This is gonna be a really long video. I'm gonna do my best to be quick, to be succinct. I promise nothing. Let's just get into it. I'm gonna try and I think structure this review in the same way that I structured my reviews for season 3. I feel like that's the most efficient way to review Bridgerton because of all the storylines. I'm basically going to be going through the season over and over again based on characters and their storylines. So I'm going to talk about Benedict, I'm going to talk about Sophie as like individual characters, and then I'm going to talk about them as a whole because they're our main couple of the season. Then I'm going to talk about like Sophie and her family, Araminta, Posey, Rosamond, all of them. Then I'll talk about Francesca and John and what little we got of Michaela. And then I'm going to talk about Queen Charlotte and Lady Danbury and what they're doing this season. Following that, I'm going to talk about Violet and Marcus. Then we're going to talk about Eloise and a little bit of Hyacinth. Hyacinth is kind of be grouped in with when I talk about Eloise. Then I'm going to talk about Penelope and Colin, and then I'm going to talk about the Mondrichs family, and then I'll give my, overall thoughts on the season, pretty much, to sum it up. So we've got a long one ahead of us. Let's get into it. Before I get into our specific characters, I do want to say that I love how immediately this season starts out with us exploring, like, the downstairs area of the Bridgerton house. I think Sophie being a maid and the show exploring like the working class of the Bridgerton universe immediately breathes like new life into the show. And I think that's something that's very important when you're entering your 4th season of a show. We'll get into that more, I think, when we talk about Sophie and Benedict as a couple. But first, I want to talk about Benedict, our main boy. So Benedict's character starts out by like missing family reunions. He's always sleeping in late. He's like always hungover, and he's being found with like multiple women in his bedroom. This should really be no surprise to anybody. This is the classic, basic stereotype that happens to every single lead male character every single season of Bridgerton. Like at the beginning of every season, the male lead has to be a whore. Has to be. I don't know why they do that. I'm sick of it. But nonetheless, they continue it. And to be frank, it probably makes the most sense to do that to Benedict, at least where show Benedict is right now as a character. It does make the most sense to make him the whore, I guess. Thankfully, though, Violet is not shy about ridiculing Benedict and his actions. We also see Benedict is still taking over Anthony's job as like Viscount, since Anthony is unfortunately still in India with Kate. Don't worry, I will be talking about the lack of Anthony later on. We do establish pretty early on in the season that Benedict kind of has the same insecurity that he has in the book, where he feels like he's simply just deemed as the second Bridgerton brother. And that's it. It's very clear to me that Benedict is still on the same course that his character was on in season 3, where he's like venturing outside of society to find people that he feels like he can actually interact with and people that he feels like actually have a personality, which I do think is a good way to segue him into falling in love with someone like Sophie. While the Masquerade Ball is being set up at Bridgerton House at the very beginning of the season, we see Benedict sneak out and head to one of his classic parties that his character is always at. But because he's gone to another party, this means that Benedict is of course going to be late to the Masquerade Ball. When he finally shows up, he shows up in this sexy little black outfit. And it's clear to me that he could not care less what he has on at the moment, but he makes it look sexy. And I think that's what really matters here. He looks so good. When Violet finally finds Benedict, she of course is forcing him to speak to debutantes, and he clearly hates doing that. But eventually Benedict will find Sophie and his night will take a turn for the better, and we're going to unpack like the masquerade scene when I talk about Benedict and Sophie as a couple. However, at the end of the masquerade ball, it is very clear that after just one night, Sophie has touched Benedict's soul, which I love. Benedict tells Violet that, you know, he's now able to see where these debutantes come from. That's something that Sophie is able to make him change his viewpoint on. That's huge. The next morning, we see Benedict sketching the Lady in Silver over and over and over again. And it's really, really nice, in my opinion, to see Benedict getting back to his roots of being an artist. I think art is such a core trait of Benedict's character. It's been so sad the past like season and a half to see him lose his like artistic side a bit. I think that's one of the main reasons why, at least from a Benedict perspective, season 3 felt a little weird. It's because he was doing virtually no art at all. I'm very excited to see him get back to that now. And that reminds me, I have to shout out the fact that all of the episode titles of Volume 1, except for Episode 4. Episode 4 is titled An Offer from a Gentleman, which is the title of Benedict's book. But episodes 1, 2, and 3 are all titled after famous paintings. I don't know who came up with that, but I think that that's a brilliant, brilliant idea. I also think, I'm not 100% sure, I'm fairly confident that most of Volume 2's episode titles are also named after famous paintings, which is just mwah, chef's kiss. Benedict eventually starts to use Eloise as a ploy to venture out into society, and he even finds himself enlisting Penelope for help, which is fascinating because I feel like those two haven't really interacted much before. Benedict decides to make it known that he is in fact looking for a wife. He thinks that that's gonna tell the Lady in Silver, wherever she is, that he's serious about getting married. Benedict and Eloise take to the ton, with Eloise talking to like the gentlemen, seeing if they know anything, seeing if they had a cousin or a sister that was at the masquerade ball, and meanwhile Benedict is out talking to the ladies, trying to figure out if any of them are the Lady in Silver. We see them go to like a whole bunch of balls. Eloise says they go to 6 balls and 7 soirees and they have found nothing, but Benedict is still not giving up. He just kind of releases Eloise from her duties, and eventually Benedict has to enlist Violet for her help, and of course, because mothers know best, Violet's able to help him immediately and sends him to the Penwood house, which is the house where Sophie works. That's the house where Sophie lives and where Sophie's family lives. Benedict finds his way to Penwood house. This is where he talks to Posy. Specifically, he's talking to Posy about her costume at the masquerade. Specifically, he's asking if she is wearing silver. This, unfortunately, sets off a light bulb in Araminta's head, and she kind of like puts together that Benedict is actively looking for the girl that was wearing all silver. And then worst of all, right outside of Penwood house, like after he leaves, they all see Benedict pull out the glove, and this is basically the last piece of the puzzle for Araminta to figure out that that girl is Sophie, but we're going to unpack that when we talk about Sophie and her family. Benedict and Eloise have one of their iconic swing conversations this season, which was so nice to see. Here, Eloise basically explains to Benedict that she's mad at him for realizing he wants to marry somebody. She thought that they were kind of in this singles forever club, and it's really sad. This scene, Benedict kind of just like talks down on himself. The whole time he's like, don't worry about it. I probably need to be let back into our club. Nobody would want to marry me anyways. I'm a rake. I'm the second Bridgerton. Like, I'm not worth it, essentially. Which is really sad, by the way. And this is kind of Benedict's way of giving up, I guess. Like, he's so defeated from just not being able to find the Lady in Silver. He's kind of given up. He's going back to his parties, and we see him sort of drinking himself away in, like, pity and sadness. And we get this transition scene that shows him from one party, and then time passes, and then he's at another party. It's kind of hard to tell how much time has passed in this little transitional scene. I do think it's been a couple of months, because later in episode 3, there's like a Whistledown voiceover. Whistledown says it's been months of Lady Penwood trying to replace the maid that she just got rid of, which was Sophie. So I think it's been a couple of months. But regardless, Benedict runs into one of his friends at this party who's talking about how he's fallen in love with some actress, and he officially asked her to be his mistress, and she said yes, and his friend is so happy and in love. And unfortunately, this is the first seed being planted in Benedict's head that will make him want to ask Sophie to be his mistress by the end of Volume 1. And then Benedict goes through a lot more as a character, but I'm going to talk about that more when I talk about Benedict and Sophie combined, because what he goes through as a character is directly involved with Sophie. But I will say overall, I think Benedict definitely had some character development in volume 1, and I think that's mostly because of his views on marriage turning around once he meets the Lady in Silver. He still has a long way to go in character development, considering at the end of volume 1, he does ask Sophie to be his mistress. Now, to me, the whole mistress storyline of it all isn't really a turnoff to me, because first of all, it's very, very accurate to like the time. And I know, obviously, because like I read the book, like I know Benedict is gonna have a change of heart by the end of the season, and he's gonna realize that asking her to be his mistress was a mistake. So I am very excited to see Benedict go on the journey of realizing that he wants to marry Sophie regardless of her social standing. I honestly hope we get a moment in volume 2 of Anthony and Benedict having a conversation, because I would love to see Benedict confide in his brother, who at one point had a mistress himself. I think that would be a really great scene, and if it doesn't happen, I think it will be a sorely missed opportunity. But I'll talk more about why I think Anthony should have been in volume 1 when I get to them at the end of the video. Next, we're going to talk about Sophie's individual character. And guys, I'm just going to let you know right now, Sophie is the main character of the season. I'm so sorry to Benedict. So sorry to Benedict. You may be a Bridgerton, but you are not the main character this season. Sophie is our main character, and I couldn't be happier. The first time that we, the audience, see Sophie in this season is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Show-stopping, in my opinion. The first time the audience sees her, she is already in her masquerade mask and her masquerade ball outfit. So we, the audience, get the exact same experience that Benedict has when he meets this girl at the ball as well. We don't really know what she looks like. We don't know anything about her. We're getting the exact same experience that Benedict has. And I think that's 10 out of 10 writing. So once Sophie arrives at the ball, immediately I can tell that Sophie is so funny. She's funny in the books. She's sassy in the books. And I think that Yaron has captured that perfectly. I think Yaron has incredible comedic timing, and I think she has really great, like, comedic body language. And all that combined just makes her the perfect Sophie. I literally can't get over it. And I love that this is how we're introduced to Sophie. And then once the ball ends, we see Sophie run home. She takes off her gloves, she takes off her dress, she takes off the mask, and then we cut to this wide shot showing Sophie returning back to her normal state, which is her as a maid. And it's just fantastic staging, in my opinion. And it's a great reveal at the end of the episode. I love it. We see Benedict reminiscing on the masquerade ball the next day, and so as he's reminiscing in his head, the night of the masquerade ball starts to play in reverse, and we're brought all the way back in time to even before the masquerade ball happened, the day before, when Sophie is working and making like the masks and the costumes for her stepsisters. We now get to meet other characters in the Penwood house like Alfie and Irma, who work with Sophie. We get to see how horrific Araminta and Rosamond are to Sophie as well. And unfortunately, this is just the start of it. Like, it gets worse. But like I said, I'll get more into Sophie's relationship with her stepmother and stepsisters in their section later in the video. We're definitely setting up the Cinderella story of it all, with Sophie really wanting to go to the ball and the other house workers helping her get ready to go. It's really sweet to see Sophie all excited, and it's sweet to see her being supported by the people that she works with, the people that are, you know, probably basically like her family. And I just, once again, I literally cannot express enough how well Yaron Ha plays Sophie. Like, I genuinely could not imagine a better Sophie if I tried. The next morning, Araminta notices that the shoes that Sophie had borrowed to wear to the masquerade ball had a scuff on them, which is like the first piece of the downfall. That is Araminta finding out that Sophie went to the ball. What's really interesting is that we get flashbacks, I think in episode 2, maybe one in episode 3, I can't remember. But we get flashbacks to a young Sophie to kind of show us her life. I was so happy that we were getting flashbacks, because while I love the way that Sophie is introduced in the show, I think it's spectacular. The way that the book starts, don't mind if I do. This is how the prologue of the book starts. This is the very first line of the book. Everyone knew that Sophie Beckett was a bastard, right? So the book is clearly setting up Sophie being a main character and setting up the issues in Sophie's life that have led her to be who she is today. And I was worried that the show maybe wasn't going to tap into that well enough, because it's been a while since the show has given us character flashbacks, but I'm so glad that they did give us flashbacks, and I think that they really helped with the audience getting to know Sophie. So this first flashback shows us when Araminta and her daughters first arrive at Penwood House. This is also the first time that we are seeing Lord Penwood, aka Sophie's father. Irma, a young Irma, if you will, makes it very clear to a young Sophie that Sophie cannot call Lord Penwood her father out loud, and especially not in front of Araminta. Sophie is introduced as Lord Penwood's ward, which is basically not so subtly establishing the fact that Sophie is his bastard, and Araminta's pissed. Sophie being a bastard daughter of a nobleman is a very, very big deal to the overall story. Not only is it important to Sophie's character, but I think it's also really important to the relationship between Sophie and Araminta and why it is the way that it is. And like I said, it's so great to be getting these flashbacks. I feel like we haven't gotten a flashback of a main character in Bridgerton since, I want to say, season 2 with Anthony, when we saw Anthony's dad die. And I know in season 1 we got a couple of really great flashbacks for a young Simon to show his backstory. So I'm so glad that they brought back the flashbacks to the season, and I'm really glad that we're getting them for Sophie because I feel like it lets the audience know Sophie on a much deeper level. Back in present day though, Alfie and Irma are able to figure out that Sophie had met a gentleman at the ball, and they're able to figure out that that gentleman was in fact Benedict Bridgerton. So later when Whistledown writes that Benedict says he's looking for a wife, or I don't think she uses Benedict's name specifically, but they're able to figure out that it's Benedict. When Whistledown writes that he's looking for a wife, Alfie tells Sophie that he thinks Benedict is looking for her. And of course, Sophie is in denial of it all. We get a second flashback to young Sophie, and this time it's going to be to show the relationship between Sophie and her father. The young Sophie explains why she's not in dance lessons, and it's because Lady Penwood said that she shouldn't be. I do think that this is a great little way to sort of explain why present-day Sophie is so well educated, but also at the same time doesn't know how to dance. But essentially, young Sophie asks Lord Penwood about her mother, and we get information that the necklace that Sophie is always wearing belonged to her mother. Lord Penwood essentially just promises Sophie that she will always be taken care of by him, which is really sad because obviously we can tell in present day that's not the case ever since he passed away. At a certain point, Sophie is helping Posey get ready for a gentleman caller, but it turns out that that gentleman caller is Benedict. And when Sophie realizes it's Benedict by hearing his voice, she full stops. She full stops in the hallway. There's a great musical cue that plays when Sophie sees Benedict for the first time through like the crack in the door. And it's the exact same musical cue that played when they started dancing at the Masquerade ball together. And I love this musical cue. I love how gentle and like soft the piano is. And then, as Sophie is staring at Benedict through the crack in the door, Enchanted by Taylor Swift starts to play. This is very important to Benophie Nation, okay? Basically, for years, the one thing that Benophie fans have been asking for is to have Enchanted be played in Benedict season, right? Just because if you look at the lyrics of Enchanted and you look at the fact that like Benophie is sort of a Cinderella story, like it's their theme song. It's become their theme song. The fandom has decided that is their song. It's been very important to the fandom that this song plays in season 4. And I was shocked when this is where they decided to play Enchanted. Because I think everybody can agree with me if they are a Benophie fan. Everyone can agree that we kind of, at least, I mean, I did. Everyone probably envisioned Enchanted being played at the Masquerade Ball. Just because, like, the lyrics of the song, they're about a girl at a party who meets a guy, they fall in love, like, just being enchanted after meeting somebody. That's the song. So that translates really well to the Masquerade scene. That's why it's their theme song. So when Enchanted didn't play at the Masquerade Ball, I was shocked. So instead, to have it being played here and having it basically be purely from Sophie's perspective, showing how the Masquerade Ball was truly just like a fairy tale to her and she thinks that could never be her reality, is soul-crushing and heartbreaking. The lines of the song, "Please don't be in love with someone else, please don't have somebody waiting on you," being played while Sophie is longingly looking at Benedict through the crack in a door. It's just heartbreaking. Like, I would have never thought that they would play Enchanted at this moment, and I think the fact that they did was incredible. Like, that was really smart, actually. Alfie is there with Sophie, encouraging her to go in and tell Benedict who she is. And she almost does it, but she hesitates and then decides against it. Like I mentioned earlier, after Benedict's visit, Araminta is basically able to put all the pieces together that Sophie is the lady in silver from the ball and essentially kicks her out of the house. They have a fight. Sophie honestly kind of reads Araminta for filth. calling her heartless and all this stuff. And then Araminta really goes in for the kill by telling Sophie that she was Lord Penwood's error. That's crazy. And I honestly have to give a major hats off to Katie Leung and Yaren Ha in this scene. I think their acting is freaking incredible. The two of them together are electric, especially as like a evil stepmother, stepdaughter type of thing. Ooh, it was a great scene, in my opinion. I am happy that Benophie has like major screen time in volume 1. I'm thrilled with that. But it is almost a shame that we don't see more of Katie Leung as Araminta in volume 1. Like, we see a little bit of her after Sophie leaves the house, but we don't see a whole lot of her. And I'm very excited to see more of her in volume 2 because she's fantastic. Sophie is dismissed from Penwood House with the threat of never being able to work in Mayfair again. Sophie says goodbye to Irma and Alfie, as well as the 3 other servants that work in Penwood House, which is a crazy contrast compared to how many people work in Bridgerton House, for example. Posy comes down to say goodbye to Sophie, giving her something wrapped up. My sweet Posy. We're going to talk about you in a second. As Sophie leaves the house, she realizes that Posy gave her Araminta's shoe clips, like diamond shoe clips. And Sophie actually turns around to bring them back to the house, but then decides against it. This is actually a really interesting change from the book, honestly, in my opinion, because in the book, it's Sophie's idea to steal the shoe clips, and she does. But in the show, it's Posy's idea. So I'm curious to see what comes of that in volume 2. So Sophie makes just enough money to make her way out of London on a mail coach. She finds her way out in the country working for a family called the Cavenders. Then we get our third and final, at least for volume 1, third and final Sophie flashback. This time it's still a younger Sophie, but it's Yaren Ha playing her. This is going to be Sophie and Araminta at Lord Penwood's funeral. So Sophie's dad has passed away now. Araminta tells Sophie that she's not included in the will, which sucks. And Sophie is confused because Lord Penwood always told her that she was going to be taken care of. He was going to make sure he took care of her. This doesn't make sense. And she's right. It doesn't make sense. But Araminta tells Sophie the truth about her mother, that she was a maid who became a mistress. This, of course, setting up very clearly the fact that Sophie would obviously be against becoming anybody's mistress, including Benedict's. Araminta claims she is protecting Sophie by making her a maid in Penwood House, and Sophie breaks down crying at her father's grave, and it's really, really sad. Of course, Sophie's character has more that happens to her in volume 1, but like I said, we're going to talk about that in just a second when we get to Benedict and Sophie together as a couple. But overall, I think volume 1 does a really great job at setting up Sophie to be a great main character. And I think they do a great job at making the audience fall in love with her and also, feel bad for her in these sad and emotional moments. Now, I might have some bias because, like I told you guys, I'm a really big fan of Benedict's book. I love Sophie. Sophie's probably my favorite Bridgerton character. So I definitely have some bias. So if you're like a regular watcher or a non-book reader, let me know if you feel like they set Sophie up really well in volume 1. I feel like they did, but I have bias and I have to be aware of that. I love that Sophie being a maid allows the show to explore not only a new dynamic within the main couple, but also just being able to explore the upper and lower class of the Bridgerton universe overall. And again, I do have to shout out Yaren Ha as Sophie. She's perfect. She is funny. She is emotionally complex. She is like a breath of fresh air to me in this show. I literally cannot imagine any other person on this planet Earth playing Sophie. It's insane. And now let's buckle up, ladies and gents, because we're going to be talking about Benedict and Sophie as a couple. This is going to be the longest section of the video, I promise. I'm definitely going to have timestamps so you can, there should be sections in the little scroll bar underneath me in the YouTube video. If you're here to only hear me talk about Penelope and Colin, for example, if you want to just hear me talk about them, you can go and find their section. You know what I mean? You don't have to sit through all of this. I'm going to try my best to make it quick, but I promise nothing because I really love Benedict and Sophie, and I think that this season is so fantastic so far. So let's talk about our main couple of the season. So the first time they meet, Benedict is wandering through the ball when he notices Sophie, and she's staring up at the chandelier. I love this moment so much because Benedict is literally stopped in his tracks when he sees Sophie, and he's admiring how she's admiring the small details of the ball. This might be my Benophie bias talking, but I genuinely just want to kick my feet and giggle every time these two are just standing there and staring into each other's eyes. Benedict says it is rare to see someone beaming with joy at one of these things. It is positively spilling out of you. And I could die right there. Benedict has so many lines in just volume 1 that he says to Sophie where I'm just like, oh my god. Ugh. Swoon. Benedict takes Sophie towards the dance floor, and Sophie tells Benedict that she is not looking for a husband, and Benedict's face drops, which I think is so funny because, mind you, Benedict, 5 minutes ago, you were positive that you didn't want to get married. So why are you so sad? Sophie tries to avoid dancing with Benedict, and Benedict takes this as like a personal offense. He's worried he's offended her, done something wrong, said something wrong, but in reality, it's because Sophie can't dance. She doesn't know how. So Benedict steals Sophie away from the ball and takes her out to like this little gazebo to teach her how to dance. And it's even more perfect than I ever could have possibly imagined. When they sneak away to this little gazebo, Benedict tells Sophie that she's not like the other ladies of the ton. He's kind of sort of shitting on the other ladies of society. And I love that immediately Sophie shuts that shit down. She's not having it. And she defends all the ladies that are inside the ball. And I hate this term normally in real life. I hate this term and I can't believe I'm about to use it. But this is genuinely what I call being a girl's girl. I love that they didn't let Sophie fall into the trap of being like, oh yeah, I'm not like those other girls. I don't need to be noticed. Because I think it would have been really easy to let her character fall into that trap. But she doesn't. She defends the ladies of the ton and she just makes Benedict rethink his viewpoints. And I think that's awesome. Benedict starts questioning Sophie on where she was born, where she grew up, who her parents are, and Sophie is very quick-witted with her responses. I love how Sophie is like keeping Benedict flustered and keeping Benedict on his toes this whole time. It sets up their dynamic really well. Benedict opens up about how he feels like an imposter in society and how he even kind of feels like an imposter in his own family. And this is kind of an underrated moment because it's really sad. And Benedict has like tears in his eyes when he's telling this to Sophie. That's heartbreaking. I felt really bad for Benedict when he started saying all that. But it's enough tears because now it's time for Benedict to teach Sophie how to dance. And thankfully, you know, the tone switches from being really sad to being really silly because when Benedict starts teaching her, it's very silly, it's very cutesy. I love it. As they take their first few steps, Sophie accidentally steps on Benedict's shoe and immediately she like drops down to her knees to start cleaning off his shoe. This is such a spectacular shot. I cannot state it enough, especially once you learn who Sophie truly is and the fact that she is a maid. The implication of Sophie's first instinct being to bend down and clean off Benedict's shoe, and then Benedict immediately like reassuring her that it's fine, physically taking Sophie in his arms and lifting her back up. Ooh. It's just really good. It's really, really good, guys. Benedict says, you are perhaps the most intriguing person I have ever met, and he says that he needs to know where to call on her tomorrow, which again is so funny because like I said 5 minutes ago, Benedict, you did not want to get married. What happened, Benedict? What happened? They lean in to kiss each other, and Benedict says that they shouldn't, and instead kisses Sophie on the cheek. But then he gets insane, takes off her glove, starts kissing her hand, smelling her hand. You cannot take the whore out of this man, even if you tried. He might eventually turn to monogamy, guys, but you cannot take the whore out of him. It's very serious. The clock strikes midnight and everyone takes off their masks. So Sophie goes to leave, but before she does, she turns around and she gives Benedict a kiss on the lips. And this kiss, in my opinion, is generational, guys. The fact that she kissed him first, incredible. The way that as she is backing away to leave, he is leaning in more and more because he doesn't want the kiss to end. Oh, it's really good. It's really good, guys. To me, the Masquerade Ball is so much more like romantic than I ever could have imagined it to be. Luke Thompson and Yaren have like incredible energy together, in my opinion. Especially when they're bantering back and forth as their characters, it's fantastic. This is gonna sound so silly, but I genuinely do think this. I feel like the Bridgerton casting department was able to find Luke Thompson's like on-screen soulmate, if that makes sense. Because I just think that Luke and Yaren work together so flawlessly and you can feel it when they're acting. And I don't know how else to explain it. I just can't imagine anybody else portraying Sophie better, and I can't imagine anybody else working with Luke Thompson better than Yaren does. Like, it's truly some of the best casting I think this show has done. Benedict and Sophie don't reconnect with each other until a few months later when Benedict finds himself at the Cavender house party, which, like I said, also happens to be where Sophie now works. Benedict is outside of the party when he hears a housemaid being like harassed by a couple of dudes at the house. And so Benedict being Benedict, he goes over to help. As he gets there though, Sophie steps in and helps her friend out, but unfortunately that makes the attention of these gross and horrific men turn onto her. Benedict comes swooping in to save Sophie, of course, fighting with Philip Cavender and forcing him to apologize to Sophie. And I loved getting to see Benedict beat up that little freak of a boy, Philip. Unfortunately, though, Benedict did get a pretty bad gash on his side from like a broken bottle, which comes into play later on. And unfortunately, Benedict's attempt to save Sophie ends up getting her fired. Sophie is shocked to see Benedict. And of course, Benedict doesn't recognize her, which makes Sophie both sad and also kind of mad. And she's valid for that. I think those are valid feelings to feel. Overall, though, Sophie is mostly mad at the fact that Benedict got her fired, right? So they start to argue, and I do think that both Sophie and Benedict are making pretty valid points in their argument. Benedict promises to help find her a job in London and insists on giving her a ride since it's dark outside. They take Benedict's carriage. As Benedict is helping her up into the carriage, he asks again if they've met before. This is now the second time he's asked this, and Sophie assures him that they haven't. Benedict redirects them to a place called My Cottage, which is basically like Benedict's cottage country house. It's literally called My Cottage. And Sophie realizes that Benedict was injured during his fight with Philip Cavender. They arrive at My Cottage. Sophie intends to stay in the servants' quarter of the house, but unfortunately those are occupied by the Crabtrees, who are like the servants of My Cottage. So Sophie is asked to stay in the guest bedroom. She is told to help herself to any of the dry clothes. Meanwhile, Benedict retreats back to his room where his gash gets worse, it gets infected, he becomes feverish, it's a whole thing. Sophie goes to his room to help him, she bandages him up. All of this is really similar to the book. I will say though, I do like the version of this scene in the show better than the book, because in the book, Benedict is like so feverish and is like demanding a kiss from Sophie, but he's like hallucinating, and I think he thinks he's asking for a kiss from the Lady in Silver. And Sophie does give him a little bit of like a little tiny little kiss, but I'm kind of glad they took that out of the show. That always felt a little odd to me, felt a little weird. But this scene in general was always a weird scene in my opinion. I think I was always going to feel a little, I think I was always going to feel like feverish Benedict was going to be silly, because I think it's silly in the book, so I think it's silly in the show. But I think that that's just a me thing. I think that this scene will probably be liked by people. I think it works well. I just think it's a personal thing. I was always going to find this scene awkward no matter what. The next morning, the Crabtrees are back and they discover Sophie asleep next to Benedict's bed in the morning. And Benedict, explains to Mrs. Crabtree who Sophie is, why she's with him at My Cottage, what he had to save her from, etc., etc. He emphasizes the fact that Sophie should not be a maid in this house. She is a guest. Mrs. Crabtree refuses to allow Benedict to travel with his injury, so that means that Benedict and Sophie have to stay at My Cottage for a couple of days. Later in the night, Sophie and Benedict meet again in a library, and this is easily one of my favorite scenes in all of like the My Cottage scenes. They find a kite, which comes back later in the episode, but Sophie eventually asks Benedict about his paintings, which is literally one of my favorite moments of all of Volume 1. She picks up one of his paintings and is like able to tell exactly what he was going for. They even have like a conversation about Michelangelo, like she's very educated on art, and Benedict is like super impressed with this. He's a little shy. He gets a little flustered when Sophie is talking about his art, but overall I just think it's like a really sweet moment. And I think it really shows how compatible these two characters are. Sophie speaks French flawlessly to Benedict, who then poorly speaks French back to her. I thought that this was really funny because you guys may not know this if you're not super tuned in, but Luke Thompson is like fluent in French. So he actively had to speak French poorly for this scene, which I thought was really funny. And I'm sure that was actually pretty hard for him to do. But Sophie critiques Benedict's French by like lightly touching his jaw and telling him that he needs to focus on the lips. But the moment's ruined because Mr. Crabtree comes in telling Benedict that Mrs. Crabtree is about to come bring him dinner and he needs to be in bed when that happens. So the moment's ruined, but it's okay. The next morning, Mrs. Crabtree has a moment with Sophie where she tells her not to mistake Benedict's kindness for familiarity and that it's important that everyone remember their place, basically kind of just reminding Sophie that at the end of the day, she is a maid and Benedict is a gentleman of society, which kind of sucks. Eventually, Benedict makes his way outside with the kite that they had found in that library, and he encourages Sophie to go with him. We get a very sweet scene of Benedict and Sophie flying this kite together, and it's just a genuine scene of like sweet and innocent fun between these two characters, which I feel like was really needed. It was nice to see these two characters have a moment where neither of them are really thinking about their social class and seeing them just purely get along. Like so far, I feel like every scene between the two of them has kind of been either establishing the stark difference in their social class or establishing their romantic chemistry. So I think it was really nice to have a scene that also took a moment to establish the two of them as friends. Like they have that friendship foundation where they just purely get along on an innocent level. And I think that that was really important to establish. And I think that this scene did a good job of doing that. Eventually, though, Sophie makes her way out towards the lake, on a casual stroll, enjoying the nice day out. And then she happens upon Benedict, who is naked in the lake. And thus we get our iconic lake scene from the book. Benedict gets out of the lake. He looks really sexy. I understand Sophie on an emotional level. We get some banter between the two of them, and then we get what, in my opinion, is a fantastic kiss. 2 for 2 on fantastic kisses between the two of them this season. And this is technically, as far as Benedict is concerned, their first kiss. Now, the lake scene is definitely different in the show compared to the book. It's definitely shorter in the show, and there's not really any fighting that happens between the two of them in the show. Whereas in the book, they do have a whole argument after the kiss. But I do think that this version works better for the show and for where our characters are right now in the story. I think if they had a fight right after this in the show, I don't think it would have worked as well. So 10 out of 10, lake scene. Bridgerton, thank you for giving us Luke Thompson shirtless and wet. I appreciate it. As Mrs. Crabtree is stitching or fixing Benedict's wound or whatever, she kind of reminds him of the Lady in Silver and basically reignites his desire to find her, which kind of confuses Benedict because he just kissed Sophie earlier that day, but at the same time he still does want to find the Lady in Silver, so Benedict is definitely conflicted. Sophie finds Benedict back in the library where he's actually sketching the Lady in Silver once again. They discuss that they're both ready to return to London, but you can tell they're both sad about having to leave their little bubble in the countryside. Benedict apologizes for their kiss by the lake. He says that it was improper and that he regrets it, which was a very bad choice of words because you can tell that that visibly upset Sophie. So then they pack up, Sophie gets back into her maid uniform, and they make their way back to London, leaving behind My Cottage. So I do have to say, the My Cottage scenes are definitely my favorite scenes in the book, and I think they're my favorite scenes in Volume 1. To be honest with you, I honestly could have done with more of them at My Cottage, but I am still happy with what we got. If it was up to me, I would have had 4 episodes of them at My Cottage. No, 4 is a lot. Maybe 2 episodes, 2.5 episodes of them at My Cottage, if it were up to me. But I'm also very realistic, and I am aware that this show is about more than just Benophie. Even though it is their season, I'm aware that it's about all of our characters at the same time. So I do know that we have to go back to London sooner rather than later. But I just think that the My Cottage scenes were my favorite of Volume 1. They were romantic, they were cute, they were funny, they were innocent, and then sexy. It was just, it gave me everything. It gave you everything that you could really want. And I just think it was done really well. Really, really well. And I think it progressed their relationship pretty well for the season so far. But now we've got our main couple back in London with the rest of our characters. So as they arrive in London, Sophie learns that the work Benedict had found for her was in fact at Bridgerton House. Sophie attempts to refuse, but Benedict tells her that he asked other houses to take her first and they were told not to hire her, so this is really Sophie's only option. So Sophie begins her new job as Hyacinth, and I think also technically Eloise's lady's maid. Sophie is introduced to the rest of the Bridgerton servants, and she's already making friends. Benedict, on the other hand, informs Violet that he still wants to find the Lady in Silver, and of course, Violet is thrilled. We get a little montage of Sophie working in the Bridgerton house while Benedict interacts with his siblings and also looks for the Lady in Silver with Violet. And eventually, Sophie's friend from the Cavender house, who was also getting harassed by Philip Cavender, ends up at Bridgerton house with Sophie, working there with her, so shout out to Benedict for being a man of his word and getting Hazel a job as well. There's a great scene where Sophie is chaperoning Hyacinth and Eloise during a finishing lesson or something, and Sophie speaks up defending a book that Hyacinth was recommending to Eloise. We see Eloise be very impressed with Sophie, and Eloise asks her what she's reading now, and they sort of exchange, their thoughts on books and their thoughts on writers. And I was so happy that this scene existed and was included because it's so important to me to see Sophie and Eloise get along, especially if they keep semi-true to Eloise's book. Sophie's going to be playing a pretty big part in Eloise's story. So I think it's really important to show these two getting along and having a relationship. Sophie and Benedict later have a moment together in the hallway. Sophie thanks him for getting a job here at Bridgerton House for Hazel. She helps Benedict with like the top button of his shirt, which is literally, I think, one of the most innocent things that you can do for somebody. And yet, somehow, it's still a super intimate moment between the two of them. Eloise boasts about Sophie at Lady Danbury's like ladies only party, which like she brags about all the languages that Sophie can speak and how educated she is in the books she reads, and all that makes Violet very curious about Sophie. Meanwhile, Benedict is out with John, Will, and Colin, and they run into Benedict's friend that we met at the Cavender party, who has a mistress. Will Mondrichs says, "We must marry according to class, but we don't always love that way." Really just laying out the theme of the season, if you will. And this is showing, you know, once again, everyone's kind of planting seeds into Benedict's head, making him think that he should ask Sophie to be his mistress. It's okay. He'll figure it out by the end of the season, I'm sure. The next day, Violet and Sophie have tea together, and Violet offers Sophie a permanent job at Bridgerton House, which is huge. Benedict finds Sophie gazing at the stars later that night, and Sophie admits that she misses their time in the countryside. Benedict asks her not to leave, and Sophie tells him that she was just offered a permanent job. He says that if she wishes to stay, he doesn't want to jeopardize that for her, which is kind of him. So even though they're alone together in this room, they're both showing like a lot of restraint by not like kissing or anything or being romantic or anything. However, Sophie does have a moment later on where she self-indulges, let's say, and I hadn't thought about it until this moment in the show, but it is really interesting to have a Bridgerton female lead who already knows like what sex is and how it works. I hadn't really thought about it until this moment. Like so far, every season, the girls are all like hidden away from sex. It's a secret. They're not really supposed to know about it. And they always get like really confused whenever it's a topic. Until they get married, at least. And I mean, like, that's even a theme that we're seeing this season with Francesca, which I'll talk about in a second. So I think it's really refreshing to have a lead that already knows what sex is. So I'm curious to see how that plays into Volume 2 when Benedict and Sophie get to that point. Violet thinks that Alice Mondrichs has found Lady in Silver, so Violet invites this random girl and her mom over for tea so Benedict can casually drop in. But obviously it's not the Lady in Silver because that would be Sophie, and it's just a mess. Like, this girl is charming enough. She seems nice. She seems sweet. But then, like, Sophie comes in to bring them all tea, and Benedict immediately feels guilty for, like, entertaining a woman in front of Sophie, which is, like, so stupid because if you feel guilty entertaining a woman in front of Sophie, what makes you think that you could ask her to be your mistress as if you won't maybe one day get married? He's so stupid. Men are so stupid. Violet dismisses the lady and her mother, and this is where they discover that this girl was never even at the Masquerade ball to begin with. It's ridiculous. Benedict and Sophie have a fight, kind of their first fight, honestly. And she tells him that Benedict being there is ruining the very best position that Sophie's ever had. So Benedict offers to spend more time in his bachelor lodgings to make Sophie more comfortable. So he like basically packs up and leaves Bridgerton House. Violet eventually pays him a visit. She says to him, reality is where love grows. Reality feeds your heart. She's encouraging Benedict to keep looking for love, even if that's not with the Lady in Silver, right? And Violet thinks that she's encouraging Benedict to find another suitable young lady, but really she's just speaking to the love that Benedict already feels for Sophie. Later that evening, the Bridgerton maids and like staff members are all given the night off, so Sophie is invited to the tavern with her other maid friends. We see Benedict sketching in his home, except this time he is sketching Sophie, not the Lady in Silver, which is very important. Benedict goes to Bridgerton House to find Sophie. Meanwhile, Sophie returns to the house to grab her coin purse that she had forgotten. And you can't pay for your drinks without a coin purse, am I right, ladies? The two of them meet in the middle of a staircase. Like, Benedict was looking for her upstairs. She's coming in from downstairs. And the two of them meet smack dab in the middle of the staircase, which is beautiful imagery, if you ask me. Because the stairs represent where they stand in terms of society, with Sophie's life literally being downstairs. And then Benedict's life is upstairs as a member of high society. But here, in this moment, they meet in the middle. Just like at My Cottage. When they meet in the middle, class no longer exists to them. When they meet in the middle, they are just two human beings who have incredibly strong feelings for each other. And then they start to kiss to Bad Idea Right by Olivia Rodrigo, which is an incredible needle drop, by the way. They're kissing, Benedict's acting like a man starved, and this scene on the stairs is intense, guys. It's intense. You guys saw it. You know what I'm talking about. And Benedict is saying all of these insane things to Sophie. He's saying, I stay away because you consume me. My eyes search for you in every room I enter. My heart beats when you are near. The reality of you has become more tantalizing than any fantasy ever could be. Oof. And then Sophie says Benedict, which is huge. That's a huge deal because Sophie never calls Benedict by his first name. She calls him Mr. Bridgerton all the time. Even though Benedict constantly is asking Sophie to call him Benedict, she always calls him Mr. Bridgerton, except for now. Because they've met in the middle. Right now, they're equals. So he's no longer Mr. Bridgerton. He's Benedict. And then Benedict, oh sweet Benedict, he ruins it by asking Sophie to be his mistress. No matter how dreamy Benedict is, at the end of the day, he is still a man. And men suck. So he asks Sophie to be his mistress. Sophie's smile drops and she takes a step back. Her friend starts yelling at her from downstairs, saying hurry up, Sophie, we waited for you. So Sophie goes downstairs without saying a single word to Benedict after he asked her that. And we get this really great shot of Sophie downstairs looking up at Benedict, who's upstairs. And it really hammers home the fact that they are on different levels of society. When about 5 seconds ago, they had met in the middle and they felt like equals, Benedict created that divide again by asking Sophie to be his mistress. When he asked her that, he inadvertently reminded her of her class. And he basically sent her, metaphorically sent her back down the stairs, which is fantastic imagery, okay? So that's where Benophie ends in Volume 1. And of course, that's the cliffhanger of the season, right? Volume 2 is going to have a lot of angst between the two of them, which I'm very excited for. Benedict and Sophie bicker a lot in the book because Benedict is asking Sophie over and over again to be his mistress. So I'm really excited to see some of that bickering in the show. I'm also really excited for the big emotional scene that we're going to get when Sophie finally explains to Benedict why she would never want to be a mistress. She shares some information about her mother. And I just think that Yaren and Luke are going to kill that scene. So I'm very excited for that. I really loved Volume 1 and I loved what they did with Benophie in Volume 1. But if they keep on the pace and they keep writing Benophie as well as I think they did in Volume 1, Volume 2 is just going to be even better. Now guys, I know we've been talking for a while. We're going to try and speed run the rest of the characters in the show, okay? I promise. Really quick, let's talk about Sophie and her family. We get our first look at Sophie's family at the Masquerade Ball, and we can immediately tell the dynamic between Araminta and her two daughters. We can tell that she clearly favors Rosamund over Posey, but in my opinion, Posey is the people's princess. I generally like Posey in the books. She's not my all-time favorite character. I like her just enough. But I can confidently say that Isabella Way has made me love Posey in just Volume 1. We see Araminta talk to Violet a bit at the ball, and we can already see that Violet doesn't really like Araminta all that much, which is setting up a great, feud between the two of them, especially if Volume 2 stays true to the book. After the ball, the Lee family returns home, and we can see how they all treat Sophie. Araminta and Rosamund are, of course, stuck up and rude, but Posey shows clear signs of being kind and warm towards Sophie. Like I've mentioned, obviously this season is very much a Cinderella story with, the girl that's a maid and then her stepmother and her two stepsisters. But unfortunately, I'm a sucker for a good Cinderella story. So I've been on board for this season. I can understand though if Cinderella stories aren't your cup of tea and that this season isn't doing it for you though. It's not everyone's cup of tea, I get that. Everyone has their favorite and least favorite tropes, I get that. For me, unfortunately, I'm not the biggest fan of the friends to lovers trope, so season 3 was not my favorite season by any means. I tend to actually favor enemies to lovers, which is why season 2 is one of my favorite seasons. Regardless though, Araminta and Rosamund are locked in on Benedict Bridgerton, so when Whistledown writes that Benedict is looking for a wife, they're even more locked in. So then when Posey has a gentleman caller, like I said, Sophie is so excited for Posey, and it's a really great moment between the two of them. Honestly, Posey and Sophie feel more like sisters than Posey and Rosamund do. I know that the flashbacks for young Sophie are mainly for Sophie's character, but I think I would have really loved to see how young Sophie and young Posey interacted with each other. Regardless though, as Benedict is talking to Posey, it's so sad because you can see Araminta is like actively putting Posey down and making her feel bad for just being herself. Then after Benedict's visit, Araminta figures out that Sophie was the lady in silver, so they have their confrontation moment. We learn that Sophie has been doing all of this housework without being paid a single wage, which is insane. And like I said earlier, this scene is so incredible because of Yaron and Katie's acting. So again, shout out to them. I do think the show is sort of trying to sell us a little bit of sympathy when it comes to Araminta. Because I mean, it does kind of suck. It is a bit difficult in like the 1800s to marry this man and then you find out that he has a bastard child, and you had no idea that this bastard child existed, but you're just forced, I guess, to care for this kid that you didn't know existed. Like, if you knew the kid existed, you probably wouldn't have married him. I get that. That sucks. However, I will not be falling for the propaganda if they try to make me feel bad for Araminta. I can understand maybe like 5% where she's coming from, but that doesn't make up for how awful she is. I do think, though, giving her a little bit of sympathy to her background, though, is going to set up for a really great scene later on in Volume 2 if they stay true to the book. After Sophie's gone from the house, we learn that Araminta is like poaching maids from other houses all around Mayfair to make up for that work. This essentially starts something called a Maids' War, or it's like the Great Maids' War, something like that. Which is actually a really interesting part, I think, of Volume 1, even though they don't focus on it for super long. We even see Araminta attempt to poach Varley from the Featheringtons, and Varley does consider it for a moment. But generally, we go for a pretty long time without seeing Sophie's family until the very end of Volume 1. When Sophie's leaving the Bridgerton house with all of her friends for the night, the camera just like pans over from Bridgerton house to the house next door, where we see Araminta and her daughters moving in. And not only are they moving in next door, but we see that they have at this point successfully taken Varley from the Featheringtons. So that's pretty interesting. It's just going to be interesting to see how all of this plays into Volume 2, especially now with Varley in the mix. I can't say that I miss seeing the Featherington family in this season. I don't miss seeing them at all, but I do think we're going to get more of them, or at least more of Portia in Volume 2. Now let's talk about Francesca and John and what little we got of Michaela in this season. So at the beginning of the season, Fran and John arrive back to London from Scotland, along with Eloise, who we're going to talk about in a minute. Francesca is very happy to be home, and John brings up the idea of them staying in London for the season. John does note that he noticed that Francesca and Michaela practically avoided each other the entire time they were in Scotland, which is interesting. Now, John thinks it's because him and Francesca were newlyweds in this home, where Michaela also considers it her home as well. But we, the audience, know that they were avoiding each other for a completely different reason. Now, Francesca is delighted at the idea of staying in London for the season. We know Francesca is a big family girl. She loves to be around her family. As the season goes on, they are thickly laying on the fact that John wants to be a father. He wants to have a family with Francesca, which, you know, surely means that nothing is going to go wrong between the two of them. Nothing's going to go wrong. Everything's going to be fine. Francesca and John talk about how they're not yet with child still, and this introduces Francesca's main storyline of the entire season, which is basically, pardon my language, the fact that Francesca doesn't know what an orgasm is. She's got to figure out what that is. This storyline actually made me miss Daphne so bad, because Daphne would have been the perfect person to help Francesca out in this moment. But since they don't want Daphne in the show anymore, she's not there to help. So Francesca actually first enlists Penelope for her help, and then she asks Violet for her help. I don't think either of them are any help to her really at all. And basically most of Francesca's scenes in Volume 1, or at least in Episode 3, are just her trying to figure out what an orgasm is. Eventually, Francesca ends up faking an orgasm, which is definitely a choice of a plot. Not my favorite, but I do appreciate that eventually leads into a conversation between her and John. And I do think that it is a nice conversation for the two of them to have. I like that John reassures Francesca that there's nothing wrong with her. I think that's a really nice sentiment. The writers are definitely nasty for making John say, "We have all the time in the world," when they know damn well he doesn't. But Francesca and John end up like hosting the entire Bridgerton family at Kilmartin House, and it's nice to see Francesca and John sort of step into this married life, host/hostess type of vibe. It's nice to see them do that, and everything's going really well. But then Michaela shows up at Kilmartin House in London. Francesca is clearly nervous when Michaela shows up, so I'm sensing that we're going to be getting more of their dynamic in Volume 2, which I'm pretty excited for. My thoughts on Francesca and John's storyline this season, I'm kind of over the whole plot point of girls not knowing what sex is in Bridgerton. I cannot tell a lie. I understand that that's accurate to how it was back then, but I feel like by season 4, it's just kind of played out at this point. I don't think it was really necessary. So I was kind of annoyed that this is the plot that they gave Francesca for this season so far. I would have much rathered her storyline center around her emotional relationship with John rather than their physical relationship. I do feel like it's important for the show to establish that Francesca does love John. Like, because in her book, she does love John. And then she loves Michael after John passes away. That's why Francesca is able to like confide in Violet about being a widow and then finding someone to love again and like finding a second chance at love. I honestly feel like that's a big reason why the show is giving Violet a love story with Marcus. But for some reason, it doesn't feel like the show is doing its best to show that Francesca is in love with John at all. And now that Michaela's shown up, I feel like we don't even have the opportunity to explore that in volume 2. So I'm pretty underwhelmed with Francesca's storyline this season. And thusly, I am underwhelmed with John's storyline as well. I do like the open conversation they have about their intimacy, though. That was a sweet scene. But I just have this really sneaking suspicion that in Volume 2, we're going to get a scene where Francesca and John are being intimate, and Francesca's only going to be able to reach her pinnacle by thinking about Michaela. And I feel like it's fine if the show wants to fully lean into Michaela only liking women. That's totally fine, because it changes up the dynamic by changing Michael to Michaela, right? Because there's no question in the book of whether or not Francesca likes guys, because John and Michael are both guys. When you make Michael Michaela, now there's a question sort of lingering about of, does Francesca only like girls? Does she like guys and girls? Which one is it? I still can't tell. And it's fine if the show wants to lean into Francesca only liking women, but I just feel like that changes so much of her story. And it's also a little unfair to John's character. I just want the show to establish the fact that Francesca does love John, because Francesca loving John is a big part of her character, and I would hate to see the show lose that. Now, all of that being said, I am very excited to see more of Michaela in Volume 2. I'm very excited to see Michaela, and I'm excited to see Michaela and Francesca interact. Moving on to Queen Charlotte and Lady Danbury. At the beginning of the season, the Queen is basically interested in controlling Whistledown, or at least hearing the gossip first. I don't really know. It's kind of boring to me. I cannot tell a lie. The Queen wants to find a leading suitor for the season. She decides on Benedict, but I'll talk about that a bit more when I get to Penelope's storyline. At the ball, Lady Danbury brings up to the Queen that she wishes to retire from society and she wants to travel and go back to her ancestral home. And you guys know me, I love the show Queen Charlotte so much, so of course Charlotte and Agatha's storyline made me cry this season. Unfortunately, the Queen simply says no and denies Agatha her wish to retire from society, and I cannot lie to you guys, this really feels like the show is trying to set up the fact that Lady Danbury's actress is going to be leaving after this season. I hope that's not the case, because I think that would be truly, truly awful for the show. The next day, Lady Danbury wishes to revisit the conversation she was having with the Queen at the ball, but the Queen is clearly ignoring the conversation. One of the Queen's ladies in waiting is essentially fired because she's pregnant, but this opens up a storyline that will be happening with Agatha and Alice Mondrichs, which I'll talk about more when I get to the Mondrichs later on in the video. Agatha leaves the Queen's company, angry with her friend for not talking to her about her request. After some time, Brimsley goes to Agatha's home, pleading for Agatha to come back and apologize to the Queen, even though Agatha has nothing to apologize for. The Queen refuses to grow close to any of her ladies in waiting, mainly because of the secret of the King's illness. This is all essentially setting up that without Agatha, Charlotte is simply so lonely, and it's so sad. And my Queen Charlotte heart hurts seeing Agatha and Charlotte fight like this, and seeing Brimsley basically cry while begging Agatha to come back. Like, it's so sad. Eventually, Agatha comes back to Charlotte, giving her an apology that she definitely didn't need to give. The Queen basically forbids Agatha from leaving, which is crazy. And Agatha says, you can't forbid me if we're friends. Charlotte says she's her queen. So Agatha's like, okay, well, if you're my queen, then I'm your subject, and we're not friends anymore, which is so sad. Like, the girls just keep on fighting, and it makes me depressed. As Agatha turns to leave again, Charlotte says she's sorry with tears in her eyes, which is a really big deal because, as you guys know, the Queen is incredibly prideful and never apologizes. And for a moment here, I feel like you can really see the young actresses who play Charlotte and Agatha in the Queen Charlotte show. Charlotte, like, breaks down in Agatha's arms, like, sobbing. Because if Agatha leaves and then the King dies, Charlotte knows that she's basically going to be all alone. And this made me cry. This made me sob. I was so sad. Like, I can't believe I live in a world where the Queen's storyline is making me cry while watching Bridgerton outside of Queen Charlotte. That's crazy. Agatha starts to encourage Charlotte to find a new lady in waiting to replace the one she dismissed earlier, and Agatha offers to choose for her. Agatha introduces Mrs. Mondrichs to the Queen, testing the waters for Alice to be her new lady in waiting. Agatha sort of drops this bomb on Alice, who isn't the most thrilled. I'll talk more about my thoughts on Agatha and Alice and their storyline later, but I do have to say that, honestly, I feel like the moments between the Queen and Lady Danbury were some of my favorite non-Benophie moments in this entire season, which is wild. If this is setting up Lady Danbury's actress leaving the show, that's going to be a big hit, in my opinion. I think that would just be awful, because that actress is so fantastic. But, you know, if Lady Danbury's actresses leave, maybe then the writer's room will feel like they have room to include Kate and Anthony again. Who knows? Basically, this entire season, their scenes just kept reminding me of how much I loved the Queen Charlotte show, and so that was definitely a big part of why these scenes made me so emotional. All right, guys, I hope you're still with me, because next we're going to talk about Violet and Marcus. So Violet gets, to host the first ball of the season this time around. Normally that goes to Lady Danbury, but Lady Danbury was more than happy to pass that on to Violet. Violet and Marcus have plenty of flirting back and forth with each other. They have a moment where they sneak off together at the Masquerade ball, and it's a bit of an innocent moment. It's like a simple moment, but it's still pretty intimate, to be honest with you. I'm kind of torn on Violet and Marcus's storyline. Like, I think normally I wouldn't be into it because they make Violet and Edmund out to be such an epic love story. But I did just talk about how much I love Queen Charlotte, and I think the Queen Charlotte show really sets up, and I think the Queen Charlotte show does such a great job at tackling the concept of a widower having a second chance at love. And I think that, what they do with both Violet and Agatha in the Queen Charlotte show makes me much more open and excited for this storyline. Like, I want to see Violet experience love again. And I think that it is a pretty great message to show that, like, passion isn't only reserved for young people. You can fall in love at any age. I think that's a pretty cool message to send out. Violet is also very set on helping Benedict find a wife this season. She's a little interested in helping Eloise find a husband this season, but mainly her sights are set on Benedict. Violet and Marcus find each other periodically throughout the social season. Sometimes Marcus visits Bridgerton house and sits in their drawing room with Violet, and other times they're finding each other at social events together. Violet ends up taking an interest in Sophie after hiring her and hearing Eloise boast about her so many times. So she has tea with Sophie, and there's a great moment where Violet says there's something in her that naturally wants to protect Sophie, setting up how much Violet will be caring for Sophie when it comes to Volume 2. By the end of Volume 1, though, Violet manages to, excuse her house staff for the night, and she invites Marcus over for some evening tea. This is kind of like the Bridgerton version of a booty call, and Violet looks hot. So overall, I think Violet's storyline with Marcus is sweet. I'm into it. I'm happy for Violet. I want to see her be happy. I know it's a deviation from the books, but like I said, I think the Queen Charlotte show did a great job at establishing why Violet would maybe want to experience love again after losing Edmund. I also think that in the long run, Violet finding a second chance at love could really help Francesca find a second chance at love after the show kills off John. I love seeing Violet interact with both Benedict and Sophie, especially Sophie. And I can't wait to see her be more involved in Benophie's storyline in Volume 2. Next, I want to talk about Eloise. Eloise comes back to London from Scotland with Francesca and John, and Eloise has officially decided for herself that she is on the shelf. Get ready, Eloise, because that means that you're probably going to be married so hard next season. Eloise is trying to prove to Violet that she's on the shelf, and Violet refuses to give Eloise that satisfaction because she thinks that Eloise simply just doesn't try, which is true. It's a shock to both Violet and Eloise when Benedict meets the Mountain Society and volunteers to chaperone for Eloise. This, of course, like I said earlier, is just an excuse for Benedict to find the girl from the ball. He basically brings Eloise to places like Rotten Row so that she can talk to the gentlemen, see if they know anything about the Lady in Silver. And once Benedict is gone, to the countryside, Eloise is no longer forced to speak to these suitors, but instead, in exchange, she has to chaperone Hyacinth's finishing lessons. In Eloise chaperoning Hyacinth's lessons, you see the strong opposition between the two of them, where Hyacinth loves everything that comes with society and being a part of it, and Eloise loathes it. This plays into a really interesting moment later on in episode 4, where Hyacinth says she always thought Eloise was like interested in everything but Hyacinth, but instead now Hyacinth thinks that Eloise is only interested in herself and nobody else. I'm very intrigued with the sister dynamic between Hyacinth and Eloise, actually, and I'm curious to see if they dive more into that in volume 2. I really hope they do. I'm curious to see if Eloise or Francesca will be the lead of next season. I personally feel like it needs to be Eloise because I think Francesca needs time to mourn John if they kill him this season. I would love to see Hyacinth play a role in changing Eloise's very negative outlook on society. I think that that would be a great way to include Hyacinth more in this season since she's older now than she has been in the past. One of the most foundational parts of Bridgerton is like the close bond that the Bridgerton family has. And I feel like outside of Eloise and Benedict, we haven't really gotten a lot of Bridgerton sibling energy recently. A big part of the reason that I don't feel like we get Bridgerton sibling bonding anymore is because Daphne's basically been written out of the show, and the writers don't really give a flying crap about Kate and Anthony, so Anthony hasn't been around this season at all, and he was barely around last season. So I think it would be really nice to get that Bridgerton sibling energy from Eloise and Hyacinth. And speaking of our Bridgertons, now I'm going to talk about Penelope and Colin and what they got going on this season. So now Penelope and Colin are enjoying married life with their son, Elliot. Penelope and Eloise reunite this season, and thank God. Thank God. I love Penelope when she's with Eloise, to be honest with you. Like I mentioned earlier, the queen is a bit controlling with Whistledown, while everyone else is doing their best to kind of just constantly feed Penelope gossip. I am obsessed with Colin's masquerade costumes kind of being this meta reference to Pirate Colin from season 3. And I'm also obsessed with them putting Penelope in a blonde wig so she literally just looks like Nicola. I think that's so funny. At the ball, the queen is less interested in finding a diamond of the season, and she's more interested in finding a leading suitor. So the queen and Penelope kind of sort through all of the men at the ball. Unfortunately, the queen kind of locks in on Benedict as the diamond of the season, which Penelope is actively against because she knows that Benedict doesn't want to get married. Once the clock hits midnight and everyone unmasks, everyone notices that Penelope is there. They're able to tell who she is, and everyone kind of like swarms her because they all want to be written about in Whistledown and they all want to be like the diamond of the season, right? Which I think is actually a really interesting angle to take Whistledown now that people know who she is. But this is really like the only time that we see that this season. I think that could have been a really interesting way to take Penelope and her storyline with Whistledown, but also at the same time, I know that we don't really see them at a lot of balls this season. It's more of a montage of Benedict at balls, so we wouldn't have really had time to see Penelope handle that. Penelope tries to sway the queen away from picking Benedict, saying she'd wager that Benedict would never marry by the end of the season. And honestly, she should not have said that because low-key, the queen has like a gambling addiction and she's very much into wagering. So she takes Penelope up on that bet. But thankfully, Benedict is willing to have Whistledown write about him, saying he's looking for a wife so that he can hopefully find a lady in silver. When it comes to Penelope and Colin as a couple, we definitely play the hits this season. We get Colin in front of a mirror. We get Colin having sex in a carriage. Like, we play the hits. It's fun. It's cute. Overall, like, Penelope has a couple of storylines going on this season. She's got Lady Whistledown and the Queen. She's sort of helping Benedict. And then Francesca is sort of enlisting Penelope for her marital help. Like I said, I do think the most interesting way to have taken Whistledown this season would have been her dealing with how differently people treat Penelope now. But we hardly see any of that, unfortunately. And to be frank, I really hate to say this, for Volume 1 at least, Colin might as well be a cardboard cutout. He is barely there at all. If I was a diehard Colin fan or a diehard Colin fan, I'd be pissed. I'd be just as pissed as like the Canthony fans were with how little Canthony was in season 3. Because Colin has next to nothing to do. He literally does nothing in Volume 1. They spent all of season 3 setting up the fact that Colin wanted to be a writer. He wrote a book by the end of season 3. They were establishing that Colin has this personality and he has this ambition and this drive. And then so far in season 4, he's basically just been a trophy wife the whole time. He hasn't done anything. I don't know why the Bridgerton writers struggle so much with writing married couples. I literally can't. I don't understand why they suck at it so much. I fear what they will end up doing to Benophie when Benophie is married. But overall, Penelope's storyline this season is fine. I think her involvement in season 4 started out stronger at the beginning of Volume 1, but eventually fizzled out by the end of Volume 1. And then Colin was like there for a couple of minutes, to be honest. I did really like Whistledown covering the maid wars though. I thought that that was super interesting. Now moving on to the Mondrichs family. At the beginning of the season, very much like season 3, pretty much like season 2, Will and Alice just sort of feel like they're there. However, Agatha eventually starts to recruit Alice to be a new lady in waiting for the queen, essentially looking for someone to replace her at the queen's side. Alice isn't thrilled about this because Agatha kind of surprises her with it, which I guess is understandable, but eventually by the end of volume 1, we see Alice kind of coming around to the idea of it. And finally, it feels like the show is actually giving Alice something interesting. I'm curious to see where this goes in volume 2, because it could finally be something interesting for the character of Alice Mondrich, who I feel like has just been such a surface level character since season 1. Like, I'm so sorry to the Mondrich family. I'm so sorry if you're a big fan of the Mondrich family, but they are actively like the worst storyline in every single season of Bridgerton. I don't even think that's up for debate. They were important to season 1 because their characters were like directly tied with Simon. But with Simon no longer in the show, like it's kind of just felt pointless for them to be around. They've kind of just been drifting as characters. Each season, their storyline is about them finding their place in society, and it's like, sure, but it's been 3 years now. You'd think you'd find your place by now, but you haven't. Thankfully, though, I do think that Agatha making Alice lady and waiting for the queen kind of feels like the writers at least have figured out what they want to do with them, or at least what they want to do with Alice. I don't know what the fuck they're going to do with Will. They took away his boxing. They took away his club. Will's going to be another trophy wife. Will and Colin can start a trophy wife, a trophy husband club. That's what they can do. So I'm tentatively excited to see where they go with Alice in volume 2. Tentatively. Because if they can make her interesting, like, that'll be fun. I do still think it will suck, though, if the actress who plays Lady Danbury leaves the show, because I don't think anybody can replace her. The Featheringtons are there. We see Portia. We see one of the other Featherington sisters. I don't think we see both of them. But the two worst storylines of season 4 are definitely the Mondrich family and the Featheringtons. I think we're going to see more of Portia in volume 2, like I said, because Araminta stole Varley from her. And honestly, good for Varley. I think Portia treats Varley like shit. Not to be fair, I have no idea how Araminta is treating Varley. It's possible that Araminta is worse, but at least the pay was good enough to make Varley leave in the first place, right? Now, I've mentioned it a bit, but genuinely, Kate and Anthony not being in this season sucks. It sucks so fucking much. They are treated so poorly by the writers on the show, and they would have fit so well into this season, it actually makes me so mad. Kate and Sophie have so much in common by both being, like, very unconventional options for the Bridgerton men to marry. Sophie obviously is a much more unconventional choice than Kate, because Kate was at least, like, a member of society, but I still feel like the two of them would have had a lot to talk about. Not to mention, there's the very interesting concept that Kate also has a stepmother. But we know that Mary Sharma is, like, kind and loving to Kate. Meanwhile, Sophie is stuck with someone like Araminta, who is just an awful stepmother. And like I said earlier, Anthony would have been a great person for Benedict to have around, because Anthony knows what it's like to have a mistress and what it's like to deal with that. Anthony also knows what it's like to fall in love with somebody who isn't the conventional option for him to marry. It just seems like a really major missed opportunity for the writers to include them in this season, or at least have them in volume 1. So hopefully Kate and Anthony can show up in volume 2, and they're allowed to have these scenes with these characters, and they're allowed to be the great characters that we know them to be from season 2. I just can't get over how awful the writers treat Kate and Anthony in the show. It's just, it's disgusting. Finally, we have made it to the end of the video. Here are my final thoughts on Bridgerton season 4 volume 1. I want to shout out the costuming. I think the costuming got a lot better in this season. I think everyone's costumes at the Masquerade Ball were fun. I think they were insane. They were elaborate. They were that was like the costume designer really getting to do like all of their weird tacky shit, and it made sense because it was a Masquerade Ball. And then they were able to dial it in for the rest of the season and give us good regular costumes outside of the Masquerade Ball. Like I said earlier, the My Cottage scenes were a standout to me. Mostly because I think it was really nice to get to see our characters in a place without all of these other characters existing and interrupting. It reminded me of the scenes we got in season 2 with Canthony when they're also out in the country. I like that the season is taking place in the fall. I think it's fun to see the Ton in these fall colors. Everyone's wardrobe is more like fall colored as well. It's all very pretty. And honestly, I feel like I'm much more interested in the side plots this season than I have been in previous seasons. I think it's a testament to how much better they're all being written if I'm finding myself even being slightly interested in the Mondrich storyline. Obviously, though, overall, the highlight to me in this entire volume 1 of the season is Benophie. I feel like finally the main couple is getting like the proper and the majority amount of the screen time. And I'm so happy that that's happening for Benedict and Sophie. I could talk about how much I love Benedict and Sophie for hours. And at this point, I've been filming for 2 hours. I hope to God the raw cut of this YouTube video is not 2 hours, but I've been filming for 2 hours now. So I hope to God I'm able to edit it shorter. Jesus Christ. But I just want to emphasize that I think that the show is doing a really great job with Benedict and Sophie, and I cannot wait to see what they do in Volume 2. I'm literally so excited. I think if Volume 2 is able to stick the landing, this could genuinely be the best season of Bridgerton so far, or at least tied for first with Season 2, which is, in my opinion, the best season of the show. But I do think after Season 4 will be my favorite. Clear as day. I love what they did in Volume 1, and I'm super optimistic about Volume 2. So that does it for my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm sure that this was a super, super long video, so I apologize. Unless you loved hearing me talk about Benophie for hours, then you're welcome. Make sure you comment your thoughts on Bridgerton Season 4 Volume 1 in the comments down below. I'm so curious to hear what you guys think, because like I said, I know I have a crazy Benophie bias, but I'd love to hear what the average watcher thinks. Indy, what do you think? He likes it. Make sure you are subscribed to this channel and stay tuned for my reaction to Bridgerton Season 4 Volume 1. That reaction video should hopefully be out within the next week, hopefully. If you can't wait and want to watch my reaction to Season 4 Volume 1 right now, my full unedited reactions are over on my Patreon, which is linked in the description down below. You should definitely go and check that out. You can also watch me watch other seasons of Bridgerton on my Patreon as well. But that pretty much does it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.